Beck's original map, at least, is just a simplistic and beautiful piece of art and design.
What the Beck map does really well, which is at the heart of it, is to make enough space for the user to be able to follow their line with a finger, possibly in a dimly lit corridor or a bumpy train, with ease. And all previous maps, really, for other transit systems were a little bit more difficult to read. Beck had the idea of clarity, and so he didn't really care so much about the geography, although the geography is loosely there, but he wanted to make the map clear. And I think that's his legacy, really. He's given us a way of looking at transit maps and diagrams that make sure that we don't get the lettering crashing all over the lines, that the angles taken are easy to read, and that you can follow the line of a route with a finger.
It seems like such an obvious idea because we're all so used to transit maps, but at the time it was rejected for being too revolutionary, and then they did like a very small test run, and I think all the maps were gone in something like 2 hours, so it was incredibly popular and people loved it immediately.
So I think that he intuited the best way to represent the city, and he was very humble about it, as I'm sure you know. He said he's just tidying it up a bit, which must be the understatement of the century.
The key insight was simplicity, really. It's that you didn't need to know street patterns or even or distances between stations. All you need when you're actually traveling on the Underground or any other metro system, all you need to know is the order stations come in and where you change to get to another line. Basically, that's it. The more recent iterations of the map have piled on extra information, some of which is stuff that probably should be on there, like stations that are close enough together to walk between them. I think that's a good insight. I think whether stations are accessible to wheelchair users, that's a very good thing to show. Other things I think I don't understand for the life of me why they're on there, like the weird, the sort of grayscale background representing the kind of fare zone system. I don't understand why we need to know which zone Tooting Broadway is in. And I think that has kind of like overloaded the map a little bit and made it uglier. And I think a lot of those things have moved us away from the pure simplicity of Beck's original design, which was the selling point. And you know, if I was tasked with sorting it out, I would try and like get back to a much simpler version of the tube map, like the original one.
It's not Beck's map, you know. It's not his design. And so you can't really call it Beck's map. It uses the same design rules as Beck happened to use 45 years ago, but there's more to a map than horizontal, vertical lines and 45-degree diagonals. You know, that your design priorities are important. You know, what you want to show, what you want to highlight, what you want to simplify, how you want to simplify it, how much you're prepared to distort geography in order to reach your aims. You know, different designers have different priorities, and if a designer's got different priorities to Beck, the designer's map won't be a Beck map.
It's become so much more busy now, the tube map. It's become so cluttered because there's so many more TfL services. For example, the London Overground, which is a fantastic thing, but it's represented on the map as 8 or so different lines that have nothing to do with each other, all confusingly the same colour.
It lamentably fails to be of much help at all. It's got far too cluttered, it's got a lot of nonsense on it, and though it supposedly sticks to Beck's principles, the concept is very good still, but the execution of it is very poor. And I think what Beck did largely was pretty good. There were 1 or 2 that were less successful, but overall his maps were pretty good, I think.
Having said that, I do think, and many people have been saying this in recent years, maybe at least maybe up to the last 10 years, it's got to the point, especially when you think of it of that little pocket-sized map, that it's started to get a bit saturated.
I mean, I don't know what the print runs are. But every time I go to London, I pick up, you know, some maps just to add to the collection, and there seems to be fewer. I mean, I remember, Euston used to be for a long time my main port of call into London, and there were 3 racks full of maps, and they're always full. Last time I went there was only 1 rack, and that was half full, and I think the other 2 racks have been completely done away with. It's actually quite hard to find a map. So I'm guessing that the print runs have actually got smaller and smaller as they've gone on, and it's almost like a token effort.
But you know, there have been designers like Max Roberts who've attempted to do Beck-style versions of the current system, or even of projected extensions in the future. And you know, the strength of his design, of Beck's design, is that it can handle having more information put on it. I think the slight drawback of recent times is that TfL have insisted on lots of extra things going on to the current diagram. So you've got the zones and the disability symbols and various other bits and bobs, which tend to add to the graphic clutter of the thing.
Okay, now I think if Henry Beck saw today's London Underground map, he'd be absolutely aghast. He'd just be quite simply appalled by it. He'd say this is really an utterly nasty thing. It's horrific, and it's got nothing to do with any of the maps I created years ago. And yeah, the London transport people might wave their hands in the air and get upset about, you know, the ghost of Beck telling them what he thinks of them. And they might reply, well, obviously times have changed. We've got many more lines on the map than you had when you were working. You've got Thameslink now and Overground. But you know, that's not an excuse, because in the late 1930s, Henry Beck designed an all London railways map, and it's a lot cleverer and it's a lot less hideous than the abomination which is going on station platforms now.
It should be redesigned, not ditched altogether and made anew. No, I think it just needs a little redesign to be consistent. It has lost some consistency. The graphic language is still there, but then it goes accumulating new elements that get just fit in, and it loses. I mean, you should look at it again from far away to bring back the balance. Now it lost the balance.
Sort of one of the big sort of design features of Beck's original design was how clean it was. It just presented a nice, clear map showing the extension of the underground, the interconnections, and it made travelling by underground look so simple. It's a great piece of publicity, and in those days, you know, they were really looking to sort of generate ridership outside of peak times. And so, yeah, the Beck's original map said, you know, travel by underground, it's going to be so easy. And you can't help looking at maps which are overburdened with information and say, well, actually, they're losing the message here. They're making it look as though travel is going to be a real struggle.
Is there too much information on? It's very easy with maps and other products to try and tell everybody everything. And what you then do is overwhelm the product, and you end up with something that might have the answer that you're seeking as a user buried in there somewhere, but it's too hard to find it because there's so much other stuff in the way.
Obviously, a map has to be useful, and if it's very important to you travelling to know where the disabled access is, then of course that information should be there. But I think there is a balance to be had between the information being there and the map becoming more cluttered. So, for example, you could argue that every single station has to have a diagram next to it that shows you whether or not it has a disabled toilet, or whether it has stairs, or whether there's somewhere you can stand outside to be sheltered from the rain. You know, you could, if you wanted to, fill the map with loads and loads of very important information. But of course, the balance has to be had for it looking not too cluttered, so that people actually want to look at it and actually want to use it to get the useful information.
Obviously, it's really important in the modern age to make a transit system as accessible as possible to everybody who wants to use it. And therefore, clearly there is a space for providing as much information as you possibly can on every single aspect of using the system. Whether that is needed to be or can be shown better on a simplified schematic, I think the jury's out.
The information about disability access, it's not superfluous, it's just too present. There's a problem with the hierarchy of information on the map today. You see everything at once, first of all, there's no depth, and you don't see most important things first and less important last. For example, disability, it's a good feature to have, but it's not the most important on the map. The most important is lines and connections. So that's what you should see first, and then the accessibility. And now it's the contrary. You see first accessibility and then the rest. Same with the zones. zones are important information because it's related to the price you're going to pay. So the price is important. So you need to know where the zones are because that will influence where you are going to rent a flat, depending on the place you work. So you need that on the map. But now it's too present. Look at the map, you see only zones. They're everywhere. The gray areas everywhere. And even that odd 2/3 zone with the darker gray. They're too present. That's not the first thing you want to see. That's the last thing you want to see. When you just look at it, look for it. So it's a matter of hierarchy, mostly.
There's two separate issues here. One is the quantity of information. The more information you put on the map, the more the user has to wade through it in order to make their journey planning decisions. So, one of the sort of fundamental findings in cognitive psychology is the principle of cognitive load. The more people have to think about in order to make a decision, the more likely their thinking will be incomplete or even wrong. So the more information you put on the map, the more you're exposing people to make mistakes. And people differ in their cognitive capacity. Some people can cope with cognitive load more than others. And so if you overburden a map with too much information, then you're discriminating against people who find it difficult dealing with this information. Okay, now quantity of information is one issue, but quality of information is also important. And the other sort of finding that you can be pretty confident with in psychology you're going to get is that the more ambiguous and the more badly stated the information is, the more difficulty people are going to have making use of it.
I've been involved in, again, psychological tests some years ago now, where we proved pretty conclusively that with anybody who's trying to find the answer to something, for example, a map is going to give them, or a timetable, or any piece of information design, people's attention span's very short. And we came up with something we called the 8-second rule, because we found in tests that if people didn't find they were making any progress with what they were looking at within 8 seconds, they tended to walk away. If they got something out of it, they might persevere.
It's always easier to minimize the cognitive load on the brain. And if you have just one typeface, there's less for the brain to think of. When you have details, the brain thinks of them as something you have to digest and think about. If everything is uniform, if all the station names are the same angle, horizontal, they're all the same typeface, there's less to process. Everything goes into the mind much more quickly. So I think from a design perspective, it's bad to have multiple fonts.
There's arguments about different typefaces to use. I'm sort of fairly agnostic about them. There's some typefaces which are obviously bad. There's some typefaces which are obviously ugly. But I think that's the least of the problems of this particular map at this moment in time.
The real problem is there just aren't enough colours. If you ask people to sit down and write down on a piece of paper the names of all the colours they can think of, they'll struggle after about 12. Once you get past the obvious ones like blue and black and brown and purple and mauve maybe and red, you soon run out of steam. And of course, the more colours, you can print loads of different colours technically, but you'll end up with a lot that look very similar. And you're dealing with thin lines on a pocket map that's actually too small. And it's quite hard to differentiate some of the colours from each other.
Obviously, a line that is straight and red will be much more attractive, as it looks like a very fast way of, first of all, you make it straight, it looks, oh, I go very fast with this, and it's red, it's striking, it's the first one you see, so you're more eager to use it than a meandering yellow line, for example. So the paradox is, by the choice of lines, you can influence the number of users and user behavior, because some colors are more attractive than others, just as shapes.
You want to have a look at the Paris Ile-de-France map. Oh my goodness, you never realised there was such a range of pastel colours. It's madness. Every single metro line, every tram line, every commuter line, every other SNCF line, bus rapid transport, everything has its own colour. And differentiating between all those different colours is really quite hard, especially for someone like me who's just a weeny bit colourblind. So yeah, I think that they probably will keep colours, but when you're trying to plot every single piece of transport in a huge city region, it does get quite complicated.
Crossrail is the new backbone to London. I think Crossrail has a very weak colour. Obviously, all the other lines have run out, but Crossrail is going to be defining the shape of the centre of London, and it's not really got a strong enough colour to do that. So what's the solution to that? Well, you're going to have to grab a colour from somewhere else because you've run out, and then you're going to have to replace thousands of metal signs on the underground anyway. So we're in this situation by historical accident. It's not ideal, but yeah, it's not great. And we've got so many colours now, they're not great for discriminating between the lines anyway, no matter what your colour vision is.
Now the colors in London come from history. They are traditional here, but you could tomorrow change. Say, okay, for example, you take your red line, Central, right? And you say, oh, Central is too crowded. We don't know what to do. How can we? Okay, let's build Crossrail and we'll get 2 lines. Okay, that's nice. But change Central to yellow or pink. You'll get 10% people less on it. I'm just joking, 10%. Maybe it's 2%, but even 1% is huge.
And sooner or later, somebody's going to have to scrap all the colours and start again. And that is going to be a very difficult decision to make because so many of them are ingrained in people's psyche and have been for decades now. But there are only so many colours and there's only so much you can do with it.
The river is a very interesting one because the entire point of the tube map is that you don't actually need to see anything above ground to know where you are. That is famously what the tube map is, in theory, all about. However, 10 years ago, when they accidentally experimented with taking the river away, people got so angry because the Thames uniquely is something that Londoners feel very passionate about, and it appears not just on the tube map, but on the spider diagram bus network diagrams. The river, whenever you have an excuse to show the River Thames, you have it there. It's because it's how people anchor themselves to where they feel they are in London. So yeah, I think the river has a place on the map and it should stay, especially if TfL, as I think they should do, are going to expand on river services, then of course the river should be there.
This is a difficult one because I actually had a very pleasant meal with Tim O'Toole back in 2007. He was then the managing director of London Underground, and inevitably the Underground map came up in the conversation. There was an awful lot of information on there that was very low level use. And probably 98% of the people who were using the map were having to wade through stuff that wasn't relevant to them finding the answer they wanted. It's what I call visual noise, and that's what causes a lot of people to give up because they're having to work too hard. And unbeknownst to me at the time, Tim, absolute gentleman, he didn't react at all. However, about 3 months later, I got a call from, I can't remember what the department was called then, effectively the publicity department, that wasn't what they were called by then, triumphantly telling me we're going to take all the clutter off the Underground map. I was sort of involved in it at the time. I'd made my feelings known before that there was too much clutter on it and it was just ignored, but when Tim O'Toole said, let's declutter it, somehow they took notice. And I was triumphantly told, we're even going to take the River Thames off. And I said, no, whatever you do, don't do that. It's very low level clutter. It's highly unobtrusive. It's not going to upset anybody. And nobody's going to be misled by thinking it's something that it isn't, and it does give London context. However, they took the River Thames off as well, and there was an outcry, and in the next edition it got put back. If you look back over history, not just of the Underground map, but all manner of information design products, there's always people who've got good ideas. Oh, let's add this and let's add that. This will be helpful. And gradually you overload the product and it becomes unwieldy. And then you have a spring clean and take everything off. And then bit by bit, people think, oh, we've got some space. Let's put this on, and it just goes in this cycle. It's sort of midway through one at the moment. I mean, it was decluttered, and then we had a load of other stuff has been put back. It hasn't got quite back to 2007, but I expect it will.
The River Thames doesn't perform a journey planning feature necessarily, but it does orientate the map. It sort of draws a line underneath the central area. It tells you a little bit about what you're looking at in terms to everywhere else. So it serves a useful purpose in when you're looking at a map for the first time, just getting your head round where exactly it is you should be looking.
If you're a tourist to London, then staring at a map that's just a diagram that looks like a colourful circuit diagram, it can be a bit bewildering. But if you throw in the river, a nice big blue windy reassuring thing, it helps them realise, oh, this is London, I recognise that shape as well, and it helps people feel closer to where they are.
Corporations don't like playing with fire, they don't like experimenting with maps, especially if there's no really strong reason for changing. And by and large, the subway system itself or metro system isn't going to change from one year to the next. A few extra lines here and there. There was speculation that when London started getting really crowded with the Elizabeth line and so on, then we need to change the design. But I think it's coped quite well with having all these extra lines packed in.
I always come back to the same starting point with anything I'm involved in. What is the problem to which you think what you want me to do is going to give you the solution? And unless you actually know what the problem is, what is the purpose of this product, any design is not going to work. And it's much easier just to copy what you had before, keep your head down and just get on with it. But it's completely lost its way now. What we have now really does not solve the problem for so many different reasons.
It's got to the point though when it's gone beyond anything that's useful though, and it needs to change, and you almost need to have a separation of the iconography of the iconic map, which is simply an icon which has no practical purpose, and then almost have a load of spin-offs or a completely redesign or even completely abandon the map as a navigational aid and have other methods come in place. It came to the end of its life many, many years ago, but I think that it's so iconic that people can't actually really imagine a life without it.
From bad map designs, you can see that there isn't a theory of effective design that's underpinning this map, because if there was, they would design it more consistently in certain ways, and there's certain things they wouldn't do. And we've done research on this. This is really interesting research. We gave people underground maps to evaluate, and what we've done is we'd varied the design rules, we'd varied the design criteria. So some of the maps were standard London rules, horizontal, vertical lines, 45-degree diagonals. Some maps were curvilinear, so only curves, no straight lines anywhere. And some maps were what we call multilinear. They were straight line maps with sharp corners, but any angle you like. So it is varied design rules. We varied the design parameters, the design criteria. So we had what we called stylized maps, which had simple trajectories. And then we called them compact maps because we didn't want to tell people they're rubbish maps, because then that would have clouded their judgment. We called them compact maps, but they're designed to have complicated line trajectories, twisty-turny, without being geographically accurate. And then we had geographically accurate maps as well. They were labelled geographically accurate, and they were. And what we pretty well found, and what we'd asked people to do, was we asked them to rate the maps for usability. 9 maps, 3x3, 3 different design rules, 3 different design parameters. So we asked people to rate them. Do you think this map is easy to use, hard to use? And by getting each person to rate all the 9 maps for how easy they thought the map was to use, we could then work out what people's theories were in their heads of effective design. Because if a person rates certain types of map highly, then their theory of design is that maps designed like this are good, maps not designed like this are bad. What we found, it was roughly half and half, but with more people in one category. We found one category of people that rated the ease of use of a map by design rules. So London design rules rated best, multilinear maps rated second best, curvilinear maps rated worse. We found a substantial minority of people, I think it's about 40%, rated maps by how they were designed. Simple line trajectories best, complex line trajectories worst. Okay, they can't both be right, but what we could do from this experiment was say, people have different theories of effective design. The intriguing thing was we asked people to rate themselves according to how much they knew about design. So we had one category, which was people who read papers about design, were involved in the design business or involved in the transport business, and we had everyone else. And what we found was there was no difference whatsoever in the pattern of preferences. So most people in the design profession rated London rules as the best, and most people not in the design profession likewise. Okay, what's that mean? Well, it means that if your theory of effective design is it's London design rules are best, no matter what the implementation, then you're going to look at your underground map of London or Paris or Berlin, and you can say, well, it's got the London design rules, these are the best design rules possible, so we don't need to fix it. So that's why people hang around with these designs. It's because, as far as they're concerned, they're designed in the best possible way that you can think of.